Salam and peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Laiq Sadiqi, the father of the Holophase. Episode 6, Part 7 Languages of the World Human, DNA, Rugs, and Phi. In the last part, we shifted from thinking about the universe as a collection of things to thinking of it as a language written in a single field, the holophase phi. We imagined phi as a kind of hidden rhythm present everywhere, and we started to see its derivatives as the letters and grammar of a deeper code of existence. Now, before we dive into those letters in detail, we are going to step sideways and look at other languages we already know. Because once you see how human language, DNA, and weaving work, the Phi language will begin to feel both familiar and utterly new. So let us start from a simple question. What exactly is a language? It is tempting to say words or sounds, but that is only the surface. At its core, a language is any system where three things come together: symbols, rules, and meaning. You have some set of marks or sounds or patterns. You have a grammar that tells you how to arrange them. And, most importantly, there is a way to interpret those arrangements so that they stand for something beyond themselves. Whenever those three elements are present, you are in the presence of a language, even if nobody calls it that. Human speech is the clearest example. Our symbols are the sounds we make with our mouths or the letters we draw on a page. Our grammar tells us how to place them in an order that feels right: subject, verb, object, questions, commands, tense, and so on. The meaning arises when a listener or reader takes in that pattern and links it to an experience. When you hear someone say, "close the door," you do not just hear noise. You recognize an instruction and maybe even stand up and move. The remarkable thing is that these little vibrations in the air, or dark lines on white paper, can make another human being laugh, cry, remember their childhood, or decide to change their life. But notice something subtle. Human language is not the thing it describes. The word fire does not burn you. The word water does not quench your thirst. The letters, sounds, and grammar sit on one layer. The real world they refer to sits on another. Language is a bridge between them, a symbolic shortcut. DNA is another language, but it feels very different. It is not written in sounds or letters, but in four chemical bases: A, T, C, and G. These are like a tiny four-letter alphabet. The grammar of DNA is the way these letters are grouped into triplets, called codons, and how those triplets are read by cellular machinery to build proteins. A single codon might tell the cell, "add this amino acid now." A long sequence of codons spells out a whole protein the way a sentence spells out a thought. Over millions of years, entire recipes for bodies have been written, copied, edited, and recombined in this biochemical script. Just as with human language, DNA is not the organism itself. The coded instructions live in the nucleus of a cell, but the body that grows from them is made of flesh, bone, and neurons. The DNA script is like the recipe. The living system is the cooked meal. One exists in a small compact form, folded and wrapped. The other unfolds in space and time as a walking, breathing animal. Now think for a moment about the difference between hearing a story and weaving a carpet. When you hear a story, the words disappear as soon as they are spoken. They are like footprints in the air. When you weave a carpet, the pattern stays. Every knot you tie, every crossing of thread is frozen into the fabric. Someone can walk into the room 100 years later and still see the choices some weaver made in an afternoon generations ago. Weaving, too, is a language. The basic symbol is a single thread, passing over or under another. The grammar is the set of rules that determines how you repeat those over/under moves, row after row, and how you change colors and directions. The meaning shows up as birds, flowers, geometric borders, stories of migration, or mythology encoded into the rug's pattern. People may not think of it as a language, but the loom, the weaver, and the rug are engaged in a real conversation, a sequence of discrete actions that leave a durable trace. Here again, what is being expressed is separate from what expresses it. The wool is one thing, the story of the tribe or the symbol of a tree of life is another. The wool is the medium, the pattern is the message. At this point, a picture begins to emerge. Human language, DNA, and weaving all share the same skeleton: symbols, rules, and meaning. But in each case, the language is not identical with the reality it talks about. Words point to things. Genes symbolize bodies. Knots symbolize stories or status or belief. In each case, there are two layers: the code and what it describes. The Holophase language, the Phi language, is more radical. It proposes that the code and the reality are in a deep sense the same thing. There is no separate layer underneath. The thread is not just carrying the pattern, the thread is the pattern. Phi is not a symbol for reality. Phi is reality speaking itself. To feel the difference, let us slow down and compare. Imagine a page of printed text in front of you. The black marks on white paper are clearly not trees or mountains or emotions. They're just ink. Only when you learn the alphabet and grammar do those marks transform into meaning in your mind. Now imagine you have a strand of DNA with a sequence of A, T, C, and G. The letters carry information about proteins, but a protein is something else, a folded, three-dimensional molecule doing work in a cell. Finally, imagine a woven carpet. The knots and threads form shapes that stand for something: a garden, an animal, a symbol of protection. Again, the wool is not the animal, it merely depicts it. Now picture the holophase field filling all of space. There is no separate body sitting behind phi that it merely describes. The shapes in phi are already the bodies. The knots in phi are already the particles. The waves in phi are already the fields of light and matter. When phi changes, the world changes because phi is the world's underlying continuity. The language has collapsed into the thing it was trying to talk about. This is what makes phi language the deepest kind of code. It is not a description, it is an implementation. Another way to see this is to think about digital versus analog. Human writing and DNA are digital in nature. They work with a small set of discrete symbols, letters, sounds, or bases. You have a finite alphabet, 26 letters in English, 4 bases in DNA. The meaning is built from combinations of these discrete units. Everything is ultimately counts. How many of this symbol, in what order? The holophase language is analog and continuous. Phi does not jump between 4 or 26 possible values. It lives on a circle of possibilities, smoothly and without gaps. At every point in space and time, phi can take on any angle between 0 and a full turn. Its derivatives, which measure how phi changes, are also continuous. They can be gentle or wild, but they do not skip like beads on an abacus. The universe in this picture is not written in a finite alphabet at all. It is written in the smooth curves of phase and its nested changes. This gives phi language an infinite subtlety. Tiny shifts in phase relationships can lead to big changes in the patterns we observe. Let us return to rugs for a moment, because this analogy will carry us far. Suppose you had a magic rug. where the thread was not dead wool, but living light. As the thread weaves, its brightness and color can change at every tiny step, not just from a small menu, but across a whole spectrum. The pattern in the rug is no longer a set of fixed motifs, but a flowing record of how this living thread danced while it was being woven. That is closer to what Phi is like. It is as if the universe is weaving itself in real time, and the thread is a continuous wave of phase, changing everywhere at once. In human language, you can mispronounce a word and still be understood. In DNA, a single mistake, a mutation, can cause a major difference downstream. In the holophase language, there is an even more delicate balance. A tiny change in phi in one region, or a small twist in how phi varies, can shift the motion of a particle, bend the path of light, or alter the stability of a star. The code is continuous, but the consequences can be abrupt, much like how a tiny change in the slope of a hill can be the difference between water seeping gently and water rushing as a river. We can also think of different languages as having different relationships to time. Spoken words vanish as you say them. Written text can last centuries, but is still static once written. DNA is copied from generation to generation and slowly mutates, so it has a kind of evolutionary memory. Weaving creates an object that endures physically but does not replicate itself unless another weaver copies the design. The Phi language does something deeper. It carries memory and change in the same medium. The present configuration of Phi contains traces of its past dynamics. Like ripples on a pond after a stone is thrown, Phi remembers events as ongoing oscillations and structures. The same field that records past disturbances also drives future motion. In that sense, Phi is more like a living script, constantly rewriting itself where the ink never fully dries. Consider now an ordinary sentence. The sun is rising. You know it is not literally true. The sun is not really moving around the earth. But human language tolerates such approximations because its goal is shared understanding, not exact geometry. DNA, in contrast, has almost no tolerance for grammatical chaos. If the sequence is too random, the cell machinery cannot read it. If critical sections are damaged, life fails. Weaving also has constraints. If you break certain structural rules, the rug will fall apart. What about Phi language? Here, the stakes are even higher. The grammar of Phi is what we usually call the laws of physics. Certain combinations of derivatives are allowed, others are unstable or forbidden. If Phi were to speak nonsense by violating its own equations, the fabric of reality itself would tear. In practice, this does not happen because the equations of motion for Phi tightly constrain how it can evolve. The holophase language is thus rigorous in a way that even DNA is not. There is no external editor correcting Phi. Phi's own structure enforces its grammar from within. At this point, you might feel a little tension. On the one hand, we keep saying the language of Phi is the most continuous, fluid, analog way of writing reality. On the other, we talk about strict grammar and stability. How do these coexist? The answer is that in a continuous language, grammar takes the form of differential relations. Instead of rules like a verb must follow a subject, you have rules like the way Phi changes in time is related to the way it curves in space. These relations are expressed through equations that link derivatives together. When those derivative relations hold, the story is coherent. When they do not, the configuration is unstable and quickly decays into allowed patterns. What survives in the cosmos are the phase sentences that obey these deep grammatical constraints. We can now see the difference between describing something with a language and being written in a language. A poem about a river can be translated from English to Persian to Chinese, and the river itself continues to flow unchanged. But the holophase picture says the river is itself a paragraph in phi. The eddies, the turbulence, the splashing, the flow around rocks are all particular arrangements of phase and its derivatives. The river does not merely have a description, it is one. This is why, in episode 6, we insist on teaching you the language of phi, not just presenting a list of facts. If the universe truly is written in this holophase code, then learning the code changes how you experience everything. You no longer see a storm cloud as just water droplets in air, you see nested waves in phi, coupled through temperature and pressure, weaving a temporary structure before dissolving again into the background continuum. We are now in a good position to state the contrast clearly. Human language is a symbolic language. It stands apart from what it describes. DNA is a generative language. It is read by cellular machinery to build something else. Weaving is a pictorial language. It creates lasting, visible symbols out of threads. The holophase language is an ontic language. The code is the thing, the symbol and the referent are the same. When phi writes something, that something is a real pattern in the world, not a separate object pointed to by the code. With that in mind, we can begin to sketch the rough hierarchy of this language. At the base is phi itself, the continuous phase field. Just above it are the first derivatives, how phi changes in time and in space. Those first derivatives give us the basic echoes of time, space, and motion. Above that come second derivatives, describing accelerations, curvatures, and intensities. Higher still are third and fourth derivatives, refining the picture, capturing how the curvatures themselves bend and transform. In principle, this tower continues without bound, just as you can keep taking derivatives of a smooth function forever. In practice, just as most human conversation uses simple sentences and rarely dives into extremely long, tangled structures, the universe mostly expresses itself using a relatively small portion of this tower. Many physical systems can be described accurately using only the first 2 or 3 levels of derivatives. That is why, in physics, second-order equations in time and space are so common. They are like the simple, sturdy sentences in which the cosmos speaks most of its ordinary prose. In the coming parts of this episode, we will begin to walk this tower step by step. We will start with phi itself and its first derivatives, introducing the main symbols you will see again and again. We will show you how the letters of this language appear in different branches of physics, often under different names, and how the holophase perspective unifies them. And we will keep reminding you of the analogies from this part: human speech, DNA, rugs, and the continuous weaving of phi. For now, let this idea settle. A language is any system that combines symbols with rules to produce meaning. And the holophase language is unique in that its symbols, its rules, and its meaning are all made of the same substance. In phi, the story and the storyteller are one and the same. To deepen the contrast even more, think about how we store music. In the digital world, a song on your phone is ultimately a long list of numbers. Each number records the height of the sound wave at a particular moment in time. The waveform itself is continuous, but we sample it and chop it into discrete steps. When you press play, your device reconstructs an approximation of that continuous wave, and your ears accept it as the original song. A vinyl record, on the other hand, stores the music as a physical groove that moves continuously in and out. Run a needle along it, and the motion is directly proportional to the wave that once vibrated in the air. One is digital, the other more analog. Human writing and DNA are like digital music files. They rely on discrete choices from a small alphabet. The holophase language is like the vinyl groove, but extended into 4 dimensions. The groove of phi runs through space and time, and every twist in that groove directly is the phenomenon it encodes. There is no need to reconstruct it. Reality, is always already playing. This also changes how we think about information and compression. In a traditional view, you can describe a physical system in many different ways: a simulation, a list of particle positions, a set of equations. These descriptions live outside the system, they are separate representations. In the holophase view, the configuration of phi is both the system and its own most compact description. If you somehow knew the value of phi and all its relevant derivatives everywhere, you would not need a separate model. That entire collection would be the model. The atlas of derivatives we will explore later is not an external catalog. It is the set of ways phi can reveal itself. At first, this might feel heavy and abstract. So let us bring it back to something very simple: a wave on a string. Imagine you are holding one end of a long rope lying on the ground, and you give it a sharp flick. A pulse travels down the rope, hits a wall, and reflects. You can describe this in human language. I sent a pulse down the rope. You can model it with equations about tension and mass and wave speed. But if you forget all those descriptions and look only at the rope itself, what is really happening is a pattern moving. Up here, down there, flat in between. The rope does not know about our words or our equations. It only knows its own shape at each moment. Now imagine that instead of an ordinary rope, you have an invisible rope that fills the universe and passes through everything. And its up and down are not literally vertical displacements, but changes in phase in this circular variable phi. Whenever you see a wave, a ripple, a vibration, you are seeing a pattern in that invisible rope. Whenever you see a particle, you are seeing a knotted pattern that maintains its identity as it moves. Everything becomes variations on how this cosmic rope is shaped and reshaped. Seen this way, languages like English or Arabic, genetic code, and weaving are all local, derivative languages built on top of phi. Human language lives in the firing patterns of neurons, which are themselves electrical and chemical waves, which are themselves special arrangements of fields that can ultimately be written in terms of phi. DNA is a structural code built out of molecules, which are bound states of atoms, which are stable phase patterns again. Carpets are woven by human hands, whose muscles and nerves are coordinated by patterns of activity in the brain, again downstream from the deeper phase language. In every case, what we call a language is a higher level loop of symbols riding on the underlying holophase grammar. This does not make those other languages unimportant. On the contrary, it makes them even more precious. They are rare and beautiful dialects that phi has learned to speak about itself. When you read a poem, you are watching phi, arranged into a living brain, arranging air vibrations into a pattern that triggers another phi pattern in someone else. When a strand of DNA copies itself, phi is participating in a slow conversation across generations, testing which structural phrases are stable in the long run. When a weaver designs a rug, phi is taking time to reflect in color and geometry on a flat surface. Understanding this nesting of languages can change how you feel about your own thoughts. It is easy to believe that your inner voice, the stream of words in your head, is something separate from the physical universe, some ghost floating above matter. In the holophase view, that voice is a very elaborate phase pattern that has learned to refer to other phase patterns. Your memories, your plans, your sense of self are all higher order stories told in this holophase medium. That does not make them less meaningful. If anything, it makes them more miraculous. The universe has grown a way to talk about itself, inside itself, using structures written in the same field that also writes galaxies and atoms. You might worry that calling everything just patterns in phi is reductive, that it drains the world of richness. But emergent languages often have properties that are not obvious from the underlying substrate. The rules of chess are simple, yet the space of possible games is unimaginably large and contains beauty, drama, and genius. The finite alphabet of DNA gives rise to the entire diversity of life. In the same way, the continuous alphabet of phi derivatives can generate an enormous space of possible worlds. The fact that they are all written in one field does not make them dull. It makes their relationships precise and, in principle, understandable. Another point that can help is to think in terms of levels of description rather than levels of reality. When a musician reads sheet music, she does not deny the existence of individual notes just because she is thinking in phrases and moods. She is simply choosing a level of abstraction appropriate to what she wants to express. In physics, we can choose to talk in terms of particles, fluids, fields, or now in terms of phi and its derivatives. None of these levels cancel the others, they fit inside one another. The holophase language is proposed as the most fundamental level we know how to write down, the one from which the others can be systematically derived. Because this series is aimed at listeners without a technical background, we will not ask you to do calculations. Instead, we will keep returning to vivid images. When we say derivative, think of a slope on a hill, or the speed of a car, or how fast a melody is climbing in pitch. When we say second derivative, think of how much that speed is itself changing. Are you pressing the accelerator, braking, or coasting? When we say curvature, imagine the way a path bends, the way a river snakes, the way a fingerprint curls. These images will serve as your intuitive handles for the more abstract objects in the Holophase Atlas. Later, when we show you the master tree of phi and its derivatives, do not be intimidated by the symbols. Remember that each line and node in that tree is just another way of asking, how is phi changing here? Or, how is the change of phi changing? The tree is a map of possible questions one can ask of reality at a point. Some questions are about time, some about space, some about motion along particular paths. Others are about how loops in phi wrap around themselves to create enduring structures. Once you see the pattern, the symbols will feel less like foreign glyphs and more like abbreviations for concepts you already grasp. Before we finish this part, there is one more contrast that will be useful later: the difference between local and global language. Human sentences are local in the sense that they have a beginning and an end. They happen in sequence. A story stretches over time, but you only hear one word at a time. Rugs are global. You see the whole pattern at once they are finished. DNA lives in between. The code is local along the strand, but its effects are global in the organism. The holophase language combines both aspects. Locally, at every point in space and time, phi and its derivatives describe what is happening right there: how fast the phase is turning, how sharply it is bending, whether there is a defect nearby. Globally, those local descriptions stitch together into extended patterns: waves crossing entire galaxies, coherent structures like atoms or planets, flows and fields that reach across great distances. When we talk about the Atlas of Phi, we are almost always talking about these local descriptors. When we talk about forces, particles, and fields, we are talking about how those local pieces assemble into global stories. In the end, the reason we have spent so much time in this part comparing Phi language to human speech, DNA, and weaving is simple. Your mind already knows how to handle languages. You know that letters by themselves are not very meaningful, but that their combinations can build worlds. You know that a small alphabet can produce infinite stories. You know that grammar matters, that subtle differences in order and emphasis can change meaning completely. All we are doing now is inviting you to apply that same intuition one level deeper, to a language you cannot hear with your ears or see directly with your eyes, but which is constantly producing the world you inhabit.